Although it's no longer dominating headlines, the war in Ukraine is far from over. The fighting continues every day. Ukrainians remain on the front lines, and Russia keeps launching attacks, committing the same crimes against civilians that it has committed since the very beginning of the invasion. The reality on the ground has not changed. On November 19th, Russian drones and missiles, including Kaliber cruise missiles, struck the city of Ternopil, killing 28 people and injuring nearly 100. The war may feel distant now, but it is still brutally real for millions of people. Despite this ongoing violence, a major political development has emerged. The Trump administration claims to have drafted a complete 28-point peace plan for Ukraine, reportedly inspired by the one created for the conflict in Gaza. Ukraine, for its part, continues to insist on a simple principle. It wants real, lasting peace that won't collapse under the pressure of another Russian invasion. But according to the leaked document, the plan offers something very different. The plan was reportedly written by Trump's envoy Steve Jobhov, with input from Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Jared Kushner, essentially the same team involved in the Gaza plan. But this time, the framework they created treats Ukraine almost as if it were the aggressor, rather than the victim of an unprovoked invasion. What resulted is a plan overwhelmingly shaped around Russia's interests, not Ukraine's and not Europe's. The leaked proposal is organized around territorial, military, and political-economic demands. And together they paint a picture of a settlement that would leave Ukraine dramatically weakened and Russia significantly rewarded. Territorially, the plan begins by claiming that Ukraine's sovereignty will be confirmed, but everything that follows contradicts that idea. Ukraine would be forced to recognize Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk as Russian territory, not just the areas Russia currently occupies, but the entire regions. That means Ukraine would have to surrender land Russia hasn't even captured. Russia would also keep all its gains in the south, including key cities like Mariupol, Melitopol, and Berdyansk, and the current front line would become the permanent border. Ukraine would permanently lose access to the Sea of Azov, and huge stretches of its eastern territory would be forfeited forever. A so-called demilitarized buffer zone would be established in parts of Donetsk. But under Russian sovereignty, meaning Russia would technically own the land even if its troops weren't supposed to enter it. And trusting Moscow to respect such limits has never worked before. Control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, the largest in Europe, would not return to Q. Half of its electricity would be allocated to Russia, leaving Ukraine deprived of a critical energy source at a time when its infrastructure has been devastated by war. Altogether, these terms amount to a decisive territorial victory for Russia. Militarily, the plan requires Ukraine to amend its constitution to permanently ban NATO membership. NATO, in turn, would also change its own statutes to ensure Ukraine can never join. NATO troops would be barred from entering Ukrainian territory for any purpose, even training exercises. This eliminates the possibility of a future stabilization force proposed by some European countries and effectively leaves Ukraine isolated. The plan also mandates security talks between Russia and NATO, mediated by the United States, implicitly validating Putin's long-standing claim that NATO is a threat to Russia's security. This is a major political win for the Kremlin. Ukraine's military would face new size limitations, largely symbolic but still another concession. And while the plan claims the United States would provide security guarantees to Ukraine, it does not specify how these guarantees would work. The text only states that the United States would have to be compensated, which may mean Ukraine would need to pay for its own protection. The plan also claims that if Russia invades again, there would be a coordinated military response and sanctions would return. But the idea that American troops would be sent into another future conflict is highly questionable. Politically and economically, the plan proposes that Russia be fully reintegrated into the international community once the war ends. All sanctions would be lifted. War crimes would not be prosecuted. Russia would be invited back into major international organizations and economic cooperation, which Moscow would resume as if nothing had happened. The United States would promote investments in Russian energy, artificial intelligence, data centers, and rare earth extraction. Russia would invest $100 billion of its frozen assets into a reconstruction fund for Ukraine, meaning it would own part of the rebuilt infrastructure. Europe would be required to contribute another $100 billion, even though it had no role in drafting the plan, while also continuing to cover humanitarian aid and future security costs. The United States, meanwhile, would take 50% of the profits generated by this reconstruction program, despite not contributing financially. On top of all that, the US would secure preferential access to Ukrainian business opportunities, potentially complicating Ukraine's integration into the European Union. Once again, this leaves Europe weakened and sidelined. In return for all these concessions, Ukraine would receive access to reconstruction funds provided mostly by Europe and Russia, preferential consideration for EU membership, and access to the European market, and that's essentially everything. Russia nearly everything it sought when the war began in 2022: territorial expansions, recognition of its security concerns, NATO restrictions, immediate reintegration into the global economy, and international validation of the narrative Putin has used to justify the invasion. This explains why there are dissenting voices even within the Trump administration. General Kellogg, seen as one of the most pro-Ukraine officials in Washington, is reportedly leaving his position as U.S. envoy for Ukraine after expressing disagreement with the plan. His departure is widely viewed as another advantage for Moscow, which had seen him as an obstacle in negotiations. Even with all of this, the situation is not entirely hopeless. Ukraine still has leverage, and new developments may work in its favor. But the implications of the leaked plan are enormous. It represents not just a proposed peace settlement, but a major shift in global power, one that heavily favors Russia. So the question is, what do you think of this plan? Is it realistic? Should Ukraine accept any part of it? Will QE be able to secure changes that protect its interests? Or will this proposal end up discarded like so many before it? Share your thoughts, because the decisions made around this plan could shape the future of Europe and global security for decades.